In the grand theater of history, some stories take center stage, illuminated for all to see. They are the stories of kings, presidents, and titans of industry. But behind the curtain, in the quiet shadows, lie other tales. Tales that are often more dramatic, more human, and more revealing. They are the stories of those who dared to step into the spotlight, only to find its heat was more than they could bear. Today we pull back that curtain to reveal the astonishing life of a woman you've likely never heard of, but whose story you will never forget. She was born to a world of coal dust and obscurity, an immigrant's daughter with an unpronounceable name. Yet, through sheer force of will, she transformed herself into a New York society sensation and married into the wealthiest, most powerful dynasty in American history. She became a Rockefeller. Hers is a story that has all the makings of a classic fairy tale, a Cinderella who captures the heart of a prince. But this is no fairy tale. It's a breathtaking story of ambition, a whirlwind romance that captivated a nation, and a culture clash so profound it shattered a marriage in spectacular fashion. It ends not with a happily ever after, but with the largest, most scandalous divorce settlement of its time, and a quiet, gilded exile from the very kingdom she had fought so hard to enter. This is the story of Barbara Bobo Rockefeller, the woman who flew too close to the sun. It's a deeply human drama about the price of dreams, the pain of belonging, and the haunting reality of getting everything you ever wanted, only to lose yourself in the process. So settle in as we uncover the forgotten story of the woman who breached the walls of America's royal family. To truly grasp the dizzying heights of Barbara Rockefeller's ascent, we must first journey to its humble, gritty beginning. We must travel back to the early 20th century, to the coalfields of Pennsylvania. It was an era fueled by the promise of the American dream, a promise that lured millions from the old world to the new. In towns like Noblestown, life was carved from rock and soot. The air was thick with the smell of sulfur, and the days were measured by the shriek of the mine whistle. It was a world of profound hardship, where families lived in modest company houses, and men's lives were often cut short by the dangerous work underground. This was the world that welcomed Jevute Palekute, born on September 6, 1916. Her father was a coal miner, a man who descended into darkness each day to provide for his family. For a young girl like Jevute, life's path seemed preordained: a simple education, marriage to another miner's son, and a future spent raising a new generation in the shadow of the colliery. It was a life of community and tradition, but also one of severely limited horizons. But Jevute was different. We don't have diaries or letters from her childhood, but her later actions speak volumes. Within her, there must have been a restless spirit, a powerful sense of observation, and a burgeoning ambition that the small world of Noblestown could not contain. Perhaps she saw the toll the mines took on the men in her family, or perhaps she devoured movie magazines and novels that offered glimpses of a more glamorous, exciting world far beyond the Allegheny Mountains. Whatever the catalyst, Jevute made a decision that was nothing short of radical for a young woman of her time and place. She chose to leave. She turned her back on the only life she had ever known, packed what little she had, and set out for the one city that represented the ultimate reinvention: New York. It was an act of incredible courage, a solo voyage into a world for which she had no map, driven only by the conviction that she was meant for something more than a life of coal dust and quiet desperation. New York City in the years leading up to and during World War II was a dazzling, chaotic, and fiercely competitive metropolis. For a young woman arriving alone with no connections and a foreign-sounding name, it could be a brutal and unforgiving place. Jevute Palekute understood this instinctively. She knew that to survive and to thrive, she couldn't just adapt. She had to be reborn. Her first act of transformation was to shed her name. Je veux pas l'écoute became Eva Paul. It was simpler, more American, a name that wouldn't immediately mark her as an outsider. Under this new identity, she began the arduous process of carving out a niche for herself. With her striking looks and undeniable presence, she turned to modeling and acting, two of the few professions where a woman's beauty could be her primary currency. Life was a grind of auditions, rejections, and navigating a world filled with ambitious young women just like her. But Eva Paul had a resilience forged in the hardships of her youth. She was not easily deterred. It was during this period that she underwent her final and most famous reinvention. Recognizing the power of a memorable name in the world of stage and society, Eva Paul became Barbara Bobo Sears. The name was a stroke of genius. Barbara was classic and elegant, while the nickname Bobo was playful, chic, and unforgettable. It hinted at a certain delightful impertinence, a confidence that was both alluring and intriguing. As Bobo Sears, her star began to rise. She wasn't a top-billed actress, but she became a known face, a successful model whose image appeared in advertisements and magazines. More importantly, she became a personality within New York's famed cafe society. This was the glamorous nocturnal world of supper clubs like El Morocco and the Stork Club, where celebrities, financiers, politicians, and aristocrats mingled. To be accepted into this world without the credentials of birth or immense wealth was a remarkable achievement. It required wit, charm, impeccable style, and a mastery of the unwritten rules of social engagement. Bobo learned to navigate this world with breathtaking skill. She was a woman entirely of her own making, a testament to the power of self-creation. She had willed herself into existence, crafting a persona so convincing that few knew of the Lithuanian coal miner's daughter she had left behind. But the greatest act of her life was about to begin, and it would require a partner. While Bobo Sears was conquering New York society on her own terms, Winthrop Rockefeller was navigating a world he had been born into, but never seemed entirely comfortable with. As a grandson of John D. Rockefeller Sr., the founder of Standard Oil and the patriarch of America's wealthiest family, Winthrop lived a life of unimaginable privilege. The Rockefeller name was more than just a name. It was an institution, synonymous with power, philanthropy, and a kind of Protestant austerity that sat awkwardly with their colossal fortune. Winthrop was the fourth of the 5 famous Rockefeller brothers. Unlike his more serious siblings who gravitated towards banking, politics, and philanthropy, Winthrop was the charming, easygoing one, often labeled the playboy of the family. After serving with distinction in the Pacific during World War II, earning a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart, he returned to a life in New York, working in the family oil business but seemingly lacking a definitive direction. He was handsome, affable, and at 35 years old in 1947, one of the most sought-after bachelors on the planet. His life was a whirlwind of debutante balls and society functions, surrounded by women from families of impeccable lineage. It was a world of carefully arranged courtships and strategic alliances. And then, in the midst of it all, he met Bobo Sears. Their meeting in late 1947 was an electric collision of 2 completely different Americas. We can only imagine what Winthrop saw in her. Here was a woman who wasn't from a Vassar or a Smith, who hadn't been groomed for a society marriage since birth. She was vibrant, worldly, and possessed a confidence that came not from a trust fund, but from her own struggles and triumphs. She was, in every sense, an exotic creature in his rarefied world, and he was instantly smitten. For Bobo, Winthrop was the ultimate prize. He represented not just wealth, but a level of legitimacy and security that was absolute. Their courtship was a flash flood, a passionate, impulsive romance that stunned everyone who knew them. There was no long, drawn-out getting-to-know-you period, no formal approval sought from the Rockefeller patriarchs. Just 17 days after they first met, they decided to marry. On Valentine's Day, 1948, Barbara Bobo Sears became Mrs. Winthrop Rockefeller. The wedding was a media firestorm. Newspapers across the country splashed the story on their front pages. The Cinderella narrative was irresistible. The beautiful, unknown model had captured the heart of the Rockefeller heir. It was a testament to the enduring power of the American myth that anyone could, in theory, ascend to the highest echelons of society. But within the stone walls of the Rockefeller mansions, the reaction was likely far more muted. The family, always fiercely protective of its privacy and reputation, was confronted with a daughter-in-law who came from nothing they recognized and who had a past in the somewhat risque worlds of modeling and theater. While they maintained a public front of welcoming Bobo, the union was a clear break from tradition. For a time, the fairy tale held. The couple settled into a spectacular 40-room triplex apartment on Fifth Avenue. In December 1948, their only child, Winthrop Paul Rockefeller, was born, seemingly cementing Bobo's place in the dynasty. She was now the mother of a Rockefeller heir. She lived a life of unimaginable opulence, attending glamorous balls, wearing couture gowns, and vacationing in the most exclusive resorts. She had achieved the impossible. She had reached the summit. But the air at the top is thin, and the foundation of their marriage, built in a whirlwind of passion, was about to be tested by the stark reality of two fundamentally different souls. And for a few dazzling years, that summit must have felt like paradise. Imagine for a moment the sheer sensory overload for Bobo. The 40-room apartment on Fifth Avenue wasn't just a home. It was a kingdom floating above Central Park, a place where the staff likely outnumbered her own family back in Pennsylvania. For a woman who had once navigated the cramped walk-ups of aspiring actresses, this new reality was a universe away. The scent of fresh flowers arranged daily in cavernous hallways, the hushed footsteps of butlers on thick Persian rugs, the quiet authority of telling a cook what a Rockefeller would be having for dinner. It was a master class in a life she had only ever seen in motion pictures. She learned to be a hostess on a scale few could comprehend, orchestrating dinner parties where the guest lists were a who's who of global power. She was draped in the latest fashions from Paris, embodying the elegance of Dior's revolutionary new look with its soft shoulders and full sweeping skirts. She became a fixture in the society columns, her photographs snapped at charity galas and Broadway openings, always looking poised, always looking the part. On the surface, she was a resounding success, a triumph of assimilation. She had not just married a Rockefeller, she had become a Rockefeller wife. But the role of a Rockefeller wife was more than just wearing jewels and smiling for cameras. It was a performance with an unwritten script, a life lived under the immense quiet pressure of the family's expectations. And while Bobo was a brilliant actress, this was a role for which there had been no rehearsal. Beneath the glittering surface of their public life, the fundamental differences in their characters began to quietly assert themselves. Winthrop, who had been so captivated by her worldly, independent spirit, now existed within a family structure that demanded conformity. He was a man wrestling with his own demons, struggling to find his purpose amidst his formidable brothers. He had Nelson, the future vice president, Lawrence, the venture capitalist, David, the banking titan, And then there was Winthrop, the charming one, the one who'd had a good war but now seemed adrift in the family's corporate machinery. The very New York high life that Bobo had mastered was beginning to feel like a gilded cage to him, a constant reminder of the world he desperately wanted to escape. Those high society parties, which were the very oxygen of Bobo's world, may have started to feel like obligations to Winthrop. The endless social demands, the pressure to always be on, likely grated on his desire for something more authentic, something that was his own. And Bobo, a woman who had fought for every inch of her success, may have found the passive role of a society matron, however luxurious, to be surprisingly hollow. She was a creator of her own destiny, who was now expected to simply be an accessory to someone else's. So when their son Winthrop Paul was born in December 1948, the event was more complex than it appeared. Yes, it provided an heir, a crucial next link in the dynastic chain. For the Rockefeller clan, this was of paramount importance. But for Bobo, it also raised the stakes immeasurably. She was no longer just the outsider wife. She was the mother of a Rockefeller, placing her directly under the microscope of the family's powerful matriarchs and their rigid standards for raising the next generation. The joy of motherhood was intertwined with a new, profound level of pressure. The fairy tale had given her a prince and a palace and now a child, but it was also slowly revealing the fine print of the contract, the unspoken sacrifices and the looming, restless dissatisfaction of the man she had married. The foundation wasn't just being tested, it was already beginning to crack. The first cracks in the gilded facade appeared not in the glittering ballroom of a New York hotel, but on a rugged mountaintop in Arkansas. By 1953, Winthrop Rockefeller's restlessness had reached a breaking point. He felt suffocated in New York, overshadowed by the looming presence of his father and brothers. He was tired of being the playboy Rockefeller and yearned to forge his own identity, to build a legacy that was his and his alone. He found his calling in a seemingly unlikely place, Arkansas, a state then considered a rural backwater by the East Coast elite. On a vast 927-acre expanse of land on Petit-Jean Mountain, he began pouring his fortune and his soul into creating Winrock Farms. It was to be a model agricultural enterprise, a sprawling cattle ranch that would revolutionize farming in the region. For Winthrop, this was his declaration of independence. It was a chance to be a pioneer, a builder, and, he hoped, a future political leader on his own terms. For Bobo, it was a death sentence for the life she knew and loved. The culture shock was brutal and immediate. Bobo was a creature of Manhattan. Her entire world revolved around the city's electric pulse, the theater openings, the art gallery exhibitions, the late-night conversations at the Stork Club, the constant thrum of ambition and creativity. She was a sophisticated urban woman who thrived on social interaction and intellectual stimulation. Now she was being asked to trade her Fifth Avenue apartment for a remote home on a mountaintop in the rural South. The bustling streets were replaced by endless stretches of farmland. The glamorous friends she had cultivated were replaced by the wives of local businessmen and farmhands. The life that Winthrop saw as a noble, pioneering adventure, she saw as a desolate prison. The silence alone must have been deafening. The symphony of taxi horns, chatter, and music that was the soundtrack to her life was replaced by the drone of insects and the whisper of wind through the pine trees. Days that were once meticulously scheduled with fittings, lunches, and social calls now stretched out into a vast, empty expanse of time. She would try to maintain her routines, dressing in elegant daywear with nowhere to go, her Parisian perfumes mingling with the scent of hay and damp earth. The local women, for their part, regarded her with a mixture of awe and deep suspicion. She was a creature from another universe. Her witty, fast-paced conversation, honed in the salons of New York, likely fell flat in conversations centered around church socials and canning season. She wasn't being unkind, nor were they. They simply spoke different languages. She was trapped in a beautiful, custom-built home that felt more like a museum exhibit of her former life than a place to live. This feeling of desperation is perfectly captured in one famous and perhaps tragic anecdote. Feeling utterly isolated and desperate for a taste of her old world, Bobo reportedly chartered a private plane to fly her to Dallas, a round trip of over 600 miles, simply to have her hair done by a stylist she trusted. It was an act of breathtaking extravagance, but it speaks volumes about her state of mind. It wasn't about vanity. It was about trying to feel like herself again, an attempt to reclaim a piece of her identity in a place where she felt she had none. And what of Winthrop in all this? In his zeal to build his new world, he may have been blind to the fact that he was systematically dismantling hers. He saw her unhappiness not as a symptom of a shared crisis, but as a personal failing on her part, a refusal to embrace his vision. To him, he was offering her a kingdom. He couldn't understand why she only saw the cage. The marriage wasn't just suffering from a clash of lifestyles, it was suffering from a profound failure of empathy. He was building his dream on the rubble of hers, and the foundation of Winrock Farms would ultimately become the tombstone of their relationship. The fundamental incompatibility of their desires, perhaps masked in the early days of their passionate romance, was now laid bare. He sought simplicity. She craved sophistication. He wanted to escape the Rockefeller name. She had married him for it. The very things that had drawn them together, their different backgrounds and energies, were now tearing them apart. The grand romance that began in the heart of the world's most exciting city withered and died in the solitude of the Arkansas mountains. After only 18 months at Winrock Farms, the marriage had completely disintegrated. In 1954, the bombshell dropped, and it sent shockwaves through American society. Barbara Bobo Rockefeller had filed for divorce from Winthrop Rockefeller. The private agony of their marriage was about to become a very public and very ugly spectacle. The divorce proceedings were front-page news for months. It was a brutal, sensational affair that captivated a nation obsessed with the lives of the rich and famous. This wasn't just a celebrity breakup. This was a schism in America's royal family, and the public devoured every salacious detail. Bobo's legal team argued a case of extreme mental cruelty, portraying her as a sophisticated woman whose husband had forcibly exiled her to a cultural wasteland, causing her immense emotional distress. Winthrop's team, more subtly, painted a picture of a demanding, uncooperative wife who refused to support her husband's noble ambitions and had failed to adapt to her new role. The press framed it as a classic clash, the city mouse versus the country mouse, the socialite versus the pioneer. In the end, after a bitter and highly publicized battle, Bobo emerged with a financial victory that was unprecedented. She was awarded a settlement worth an estimated $5.5 million. To truly understand the scale of this figure in 1954, it would be the equivalent of over $60 million today. The package included a staggering $2 million in cash, approximately $22 million today, and a $3.5 million trust fund for herself and their son. It was, by a wide margin, the largest divorce settlement in United States history up to that point. On paper, Bobo had won. She had taken on the Rockefeller machine and extracted a fortune, but the victory came at a terrible unspoken cost. In exchange for the money, Barbara Bobo Rockefeller was effectively excommunicated from the dynasty. The invisible but impregnable fortress of the Rockefeller family closed its gates to her forever. She was no longer just an outsider. She was the enemy, the woman who had brought public scandal and humiliation to their revered name. She and her young son, Winthrop Paul, were cast into a social wilderness. The family support system, the social connections, the very identity of being a Rockefeller, in a meaningful, familial sense, all of it was stripped away. This outcome cements the central controversy of Bobo's life. Was she a brilliant, calculating gold digger who saw marriage to a restless Rockefeller as a short path to a lifelong fortune? The size of the settlement and the swiftness of the marital collapse certainly fed this narrative. Or was she a woman, perhaps naively in love, who was completely unprepared for the sacrifices demanded of her, and who, when her life was upended, fought fiercely for a settlement that would grant her independence and security for the rest of her life? The truth is likely far more complex than either caricature. She was a survivor, a woman who used the tools available to her, her beauty, her charm, and finally, the legal system, to secure her place in a world that was not built for her. In the aftermath of the divorce, Barbara Bobo Rockefeller, now a woman of immense wealth, never remarried. She returned to her beloved New York City, buying a lavish apartment and reclaiming her place in society. But her status had fundamentally changed. She was no longer Mrs. Winthrop Rockefeller, wife of an heir. She was the former Mrs. Rockefeller, a title that perpetually linked her to the scandal that had made her rich. She lived a life of transatlantic luxury, dividing her time between Manhattan, Paris, and other European capitals. She was a member of the international jet set, always impeccably dressed, a figure of glamour and mystery. But reports from those who knew her suggest it was a life tinged with a deep and abiding loneliness. She had the financial freedom to go anywhere and do anything, but she seemed to lack a true anchor, a sense of belonging. The social circles she moved in were often superficial, and she remained an object of fascination and gossip, forever defined by her brief, explosive marriage. The most significant and enduring consequence of her marriage was, of course, her son. Winthrop Paul Rockefeller grew up in a fractured world, navigating the immense gulf between his mother's glamorous, solitary life in New York and his father's powerful political dynasty in Arkansas. It must have been an extraordinary childhood, shaped by the push and pull of these two opposing forces. In a testament to his own character, he managed to bridge that divide, eventually following in his father's footsteps to become the lieutenant governor of Arkansas, earning respect in the state his mother had so desperately wanted to flee. As the decades passed, Bobo became increasingly private, retreating from the social scene she had once conquered. The vibrant, ambitious woman who had craved the spotlight now seemed to shield herself from its glare, living a quiet, almost reclusive life, fiercely guarding her privacy. The world she had fought so hard to enter had ultimately left her on the outside, a wealthy but solitary figure, and in the final poignant chapter of her long life, a strange and ironic symmetry emerged. Barbara Bobo Rockefeller, the woman who felt her life had ended when she moved to Arkansas, spent her final years there. She passed away quietly in Little Rock on May 19, 2008, at the age of 91. Her journey had come full circle, ending in the very place that had precipitated her dramatic fall from grace. So what is the enduring legacy of Barbara Bobo Rockefeller? Her life was no simple fairy tale, nor was it a straightforward tale of greed. It was a deeply American story, a raw and powerful drama about reinvention, class, and the elusive nature of happiness. She was a pioneer of a different sort, one who charted a course from the bleak depths of a coal town to the dizzying heights of the aristocracy. Her story serves as a powerful, if cautionary, tale. It's a reminder that social worlds, especially those built on old money and immense power, have invisible walls that are often more formidable than stone. She breached those walls, but she could never truly dismantle them. She learned the bitter lesson that you can marry a name, but you cannot purchase a soul. You can win a fortune, but you cannot buy a home in a world that has already decided you are a foreigner. Ultimately, the story of Bobo Rockefeller is a haunting exploration of the space between ambition and contentment. It forces us to look beyond the scandalous headlines and the staggering dollar signs, and to consider the human heart at the center of the storm. A heart that yearned for a life of beauty and excitement, that experienced the thrill of arrival and the profound ache of exile. She remains a fascinating, tragic, and utterly unforgettable figure, the immigrant's daughter who became a Rockefeller, and in doing so, became a living symbol of the dazzling and often devastating price of the American dream.